Hello, and welcome to the My Gay Church Days podcast. I'm your host, George Azar. I am so excited to share this podcast with you, as I will be sharing a lot of my thoughts on current subjects, politics, social, theology, as well as wanting to hear from you. Please give us a call with any of your questions, or if you have your own gay church day, I would love to hear it. Without further ado, here is today's podcast.
Hi, friends. Like most of you, I'm pretty upset about the results with the Rittenhouse case. I've been following it quite a bit just to see how our judicial system works in cases of vigilante activity, if you will. We see this rise of vigilante causes, if you will. And specifically in Texas, passing a law to persecute women who are getting abortions through this act of righteous judgment, if you will. And it's interesting, just seeing the beginning of the case, how the judge decided to set the tone of his own courtroom in not calling the victims. It was telling how things were to unfold. And then just reading about how the prosecution was treated and not able to submit relevant evidence of Kyle stating that he would like to take a gun to people who were looting. It's really sad. It's really sad to see the state of our country, that something that seems common sense is overlooked in our judicial system. I know that states have their own laws, and yeah, it's just sad. It's just really sad. It's really gotten me thinking about this idea of absolutism and this polarized country that we live in, where feelings are elevated to the level of facts. And in most cases, facts are seen as fabricated and a means of control, because somebody feels that they are being controlled by the government or people or whoever. Whoever. I had a really sweet time with my friend on Friday. We got coffee and we were talking about this very subject, about how there's just so much gray in life. And as it seems like we're evolving towards building camps of inclusivity of those who think like us and exclusivity of those who don't, on hills that we're willing to die on, thinking that subjects are merely black and white, that things are easily labeled as right and wrong. And that's not life. Life isn't like that. As I've mentioned in the introduction podcast, our brains compartmentalize. It's a way for us to be able to process information. It allows us to easily identify something that has a pattern to it or has some sort of resemblance of formation, if you will. And we've allowed this to permeate every avenue of our lives. In politics, in social acceptance, and having formerly been part of a system of control that proclaimed to have exclusive rights to morality and the human existence. It's really disheartening to see this being applied in the secular world, both on the left and the right. I am a liberal. I have no problem saying that. I feel like I'm more of a centrist liberal in that regard. But this quest to find absolutism and label somebody as the bad guy that doesn't think like us is just so destructive to the progression and the evolution of our existence. And yeah, that's just been heavily on my mind lately. This binary thinking that things can be summed up into different camps. One of the things I've been really thinking about is the idea of how we as human beings, especially in a democracy, are called to work together to achieve the greater good of everybody. We look at just even the formation of our country, the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And wanting that more for ourselves than we want it for our fellow citizens. And it's almost become weaponized against us. This idea of my way is the right way and any other way is the wrong way. And I don't think that is the majority of those in our country. I think that with the hypercentralization of media and social media portraying the radical viewpoint as if it's the broader view of everybody within whatever specific party they're covering, it's dangerous. I personally think about defund the police. I personally believe that the police system needs to be reformed. I don't think we need to defund it. If anything, we need more resources in order to provide sensitivity training, just as what was done in being an accountant, the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation in 2002 after the Enron failure was this governmental legislation that started to regulate the accounting practices and saying, well, wait a second, if you're auditing a publicly traded company, you shouldn't be also doing their tax returns because there's a conflict of interest there. And I take those ideals into my ideas of law enforcement. This whole defund the police movement is ridiculous, because if we had taken those same types of principles and then applied it back then to the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation when Enron failed and such, there'd be no CPAs, there would be no accountants, and so yeah, it's just a very heavy thing on my heart lately, and especially I think about it on the right. This demonization of government, thinking that government is evil, largely started in the Reagan era of, Reagan claiming that the best sized government is one that can fit in someone's pocket. Like, if you think about the purpose of government is created by the people for the people. What does that mean? It means that we in a democratic society elect individuals who reflect our ideals. And unfortunately, because of the infusion of big money into the political sphere, a lot of these politicians have been bought for special interest purposes, whether it be gun rights, banking, agriculture. It's a huge one that goes under radar. And the power to change that lies in our hands. And yet we're so caught up in blaming each other and labeling each other and saying that this person who thinks differently than me is the problem, is exactly what continues to propagate this cycle of abuse in governmental systems. So the governmental system in and of itself is inherently good, and yet we're being led to believe that it's inherently bad, when ultimately government is just a direct reflection of our own values and how we vote. it's funny because during the Great Depression, one of the biggest reasons why we saw a depression was because of deregulation or lack of regulation. Public companies were able to, post their financials with no accountability whatsoever, inflating the value of their company. And ultimately this caused a Great Depression. And then what ended up happening was the government stepped in and said, hey, wait a second, we need to start regulating the securities markets. We need to start regulating the stock market and publicly traded companies and all of that. And that eventually led to the creation of the SEC. Pieces of legislation like the Glass-Steagall Act that took the investment side of banking out of the hands of brick and mortar banks, so that brick and mortar banks weren't tempted to have their clients invest in certain companies that were of their own interest. And, over years, we saw the stripping away of this act, the Glass-Steagall Act, largely in the Reagan era, but the final nail putting, under a Democratic President Bill Clinton. And so it gave rise and power back to individual banks to be able to commingle and provide financial advice that was in conflict of their clients' interests because it benefited the big bank. And then we see what happened in the Great Recession in 2007, 2008, 2009. Because of deregulation, mortgages were being handed out like they were candy to people who would have never qualified had there been proper regulation, which led to the Great Recession potentially being a Great Depression had the government not stepped in and saved these big banks from going under. And so, I'm a CPA, and so I have this brain to think about. And, regulation is a good thing. Over-regulation is a bad thing. There needs to be a happy medium. There is no black and white when it comes to government and politics. And yet our society has gravitated towards finding some sort of absolutism and creating a religion in the likeness of their own image. It's no different than what the evangelical church does today in claiming exclusive rights to eternity, claiming to be both the moral direction and the holders of eternal life, and the exclusivity that comes into the Christian realm in saying that the only way you can get to heaven is through Jesus Christ, nullifying any other types of quote unquote ways to heaven from other religions. And then the church instilling their doctrine in the political sphere, breaching the separation of church and state when it benefits the church, but then crying out for separation of church and state when it doesn't benefit them. So yeah, I've been filled with a lot of thoughts on this subject. It's been really disheartening to see this all unfolding. And I think it's just a moral decay in the social fabric of our society, unfortunately. It really makes me sad. But how do we fix it? My personal belief on that is, start making friends with people who think differently than you, to challenge your own views on things, to step out of this confirmation bias society, and to have your thoughts challenged, to look at a different perspective. The other side isn't the enemy. They're your fellow citizen. That's not to say that we should give into radicalism. I think about the Trumpers who live on a completely different plane of reality. But they're the minority. They're not the majority. Unfortunately, their voices are the majority in social media and news outlets. But they're not the majority of this country. And so if we could stay away from this dangerous resurgence of radicalization and building camps on hills that we claim to die on by introducing different perspectives in a healthy way, and to think about subjects that seem black and white on the surface, but are a lot more complicated. I think that's our salvation, if you will. I have a very dear friend of mine who lives in another state, in a red state, who over the years has become a little bit more right-leaning. And that's okay. And that's great. I mean, that's how this person sees the world and it has their perspective, but they haven't been clouded by the polarization of the radical right. They're a free thinker. They want to be able to think about things without having some sort of preconceived notion or entering a conversation already with guns blazing, if you will. And I really appreciate this friend. I really love this friend. I love hearing his perspective. He challenges me on certain subjects that I have hard-held beliefs on. When I left the church, I had to form hard-held beliefs in the opposite direction to protect me, because for so long I had been subjecting myself to a belief system that told me how to be and who to be and how to think. And so to protect myself and to be able to form a new thought process, I submerged myself into the LGBT community and started to form similar type thought processes. Although those thought processes were less harmful, much less harmful than the evangelical doctrine, and its practice was nonetheless the same. I needed some sort of protection and some sort of absolute truth to ground me in my own self-discovery. But as I started to embrace and accept myself, even to this day, I'm challenging myself on hard-held beliefs that feel true, but may not be. And to be able to change my thoughts on certain subjects, or not even just to change it in a 180. It's to add in some shading. It's adding in the gray. And I think that's where is most healthy, is not carrying an absolute truth on something that has a lot more complicated elements to it. So that's the podcast today. Just my thoughts on absolutism, black and white and gray, and just feeling through all of that. I love you guys. I love doing this. This is so fun. I've noticed that doing these things early in the morning is best for me. May not be as visually appealing, but my brain is a lot more fresh in the mornings. And so, these are just my early morning Saturday thoughts, and continue to be my thoughts as I continue to grow and evolve. And I hope we do that together.
Thank you so much for listening to the My Gay Church Days podcast. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening app to get updates on new episode releases, and check us out on YouTube. If you have any questions or would like to tell your own Gay Church Day story, please be sure to leave us a voicemail to get a chance to be on the podcast. Check out the podcast link on our website to leave us a voicemail at www.mygaychurchdays.com. On the website, you can also check out my memoir and sign up for blog notifications to receive the first chapter of the book for free. Also, be sure to check us out on social media accounts on Instagram and on Twitter at mygaychurchdays. Again, I want to thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I hope you have a wonderful day.